and gents, this is the moment you've waited for.
This is the greatest show!
And now, here's your host, Clint Arthur.
You know, the place you live has a lot to do with how much you can be and do and have. And that's why we've got the man, the legend, the one and only Tony Silva here to talk to us about home repair and how to keep your home at the max. Tony, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, Clint, great to be here.
And what's on the agenda for us today?
So today we're going to talk about asbestos. You know, a lot of times people do home repairs themselves, or they start investigating, figuring out new things that they need to do. And depending on when your home was built, something that really should factor in of a health concern is when was your home built, and do you need to worry about asbestos? And where should you look for that kind of things? What does it look like?
How can somebody recognize asbestos?
So the first thing you want to do is you really don't have to even worry about this problem if your home was built before 1970. The biggest challenges we find are really from the 30s to the 50s, 60s. That's when the most of it happens. But what you're looking for is depending on where. So if you're considering, for example, upgrading your insulation, right? That's a tough one to tell because the fibers in the insulation are difficult. You're going to really want to ask your contractor that's upgrading your insulation, especially if they're going to be disturbing it in any way and making it what's called friable. Friable is when it gets into the air, and that's when the fibers can be breathed in, and that's when it's not good. I mean, it's always not good, but that's what's really not good. So, you're going to want to ask your insulation contractor if you know your home was built in that era.
Which era?
It's going to be the 30s to the 60s, really. If your home was built from 1930 to 1960.
That's when the main asbestos issues came up.
That's the big stuff. That's when it was like party for asbestos, the best stuff ever, right? So you're going to want to ask them to do an asbestos test, and they may or may not know that. That might be an indication of whether you should hire them or not, but that's definitely going to be something I would want. If it comes to something like, for example, your siding. Siding was another big place where asbestos was put in. Now, in my opinion, that's easy to spot. This is my job, right? I know what asbestos siding looks like, but it's typically a panel. It's about, the size of a ruler tall and 2 to 3 rulers wide. It's like 1 foot by 3 foot. It's maybe 1/4 of an inch thin. But if you look at the edge of it, you'll see little fibers sticking out. And it kind of looks like fiberglass hanging off the side, and it's a panel. So if your home was built from the 30s to the 70s and you've got a panel on the side of your house, don't touch it. Make sure, again, if you're considering having your home re-sided, that the siding contractor you're working with or the general contractor you're working with is taking that into consideration and, doing testing on that stuff. But really, a lot of the times you can identify that stuff yourself, and it's usually a white color unless it's been painted. But then you can, kind of look behind a downspout, a gutter drain to see where they might have missed the paint. Is it white? That stuff was almost always white, or like a kind of like a light lime green. That's what that siding looks like.
What about like taking a knife and like cutting into it to see what's inside?
You can't really cut into it. It's more of like a concrete panel, kind of like a hardy board or a backer board that you might see at Home Depot in the tile section. It's going to look like that. It's only maybe 1/8 of an inch thick, a little bit thicker than the thickness of a quarter, let's say.
Okay, now if it is a panel, is that disturbable? Is that friable? So you have to worry about that?
That's a great question. The panel is actually non-friable by itself. So a lot of times, I don't want to freak anybody out. Like, oh my gosh, I got this on my house. It's fine. Just, leave it alone. The challenge is when you tear it off, right? You're going to get new siding put on. And if you're not working with, the right contractor who's taken the right measures, has sent it off to, ITEL laboratories for asbestos testing and knows what they're doing. It requires a permit. You're talking about EPA. This is a hazardous material. You're not allowed to touch it without special permission. And if you do, not only are you endangering yourself, and this might scare some people, but you're endangering your neighbors, right? You have a neighbor on each side of you, maybe behind you, and that when you tear the stuff off and it breaks, that's when it becomes friable. That's when the fibers get released into the air, and that's when you got trouble.
Ouch. If you don't want any trouble, I really suggest that you go to homerepair.com and give them a call and tell them that Tony Silva is the one that sent you, and you'll get some special treatment because that's his own company. And is there a phone number they can call, Tony?
Absolutely. 1-877-RED-HOUSE.
Red House. 1-877-RED-HOUSE, homerepair.com. Tony, we really appreciate you being our home repair expert and looking forward to next week.
Great. Thanks, Clint.